In this movie, we're going to look into how to extend an existing rig and how to use the Spline IK for longer bone chains. So I've got my fella up here, simple guy, and he has a full rig on him, which is done with the DNS auto rig. But it's not complete because this fella now has a tail, and the tail needs its own bone chain. So the easiest to do that is to just go into your side view, zoom in on the tail and draw in from the rigging, building joints, just build a nice row of joints. And they will automatically appear in the center because he's built centered, which is perfect. It's not attached to the other joints, but that's really easy. You select a joint and the joint where it needs to go. We hit P and it's connected to the other joint and will thus move with all the other joints. So now we need a way to control these joints. We could, of course, use our regular IK. Here are the options for our regular IK. We always want to rotate plane solver, and if you put that on and show the IK, it works, but we don't have much control over how it bends, and it also always bends in a single plane. It cannot make a nice wiggle. So that's not the best option. There is a different kind of IK we can use, and if we go into our rigging menu, under Skeleton IK, there's the Create IK Spline handle, and that has a bunch of options. We do not need to auto-parent the curve. We do want to auto-create the curve, and we can set how many spans we want, and we might want just one span, which means 4 points, but this tail has about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 joints, so we probably need like 6 points in our curve. And if we want to apply the Spline IK, it's exactly the same as normal IK. You click the first joint, you click the last joint, and you get a Spline IK. Now, Spline IK works different than regular IK in the sense that you cannot move the IK handle. The IK handle is stuck to the end of the curve, and we cannot currently see the curve because the mesh is on top, but you see there's a curve inside our joints layer. If we temporarily turn off the joints, we can actually go to our curve and grab one of the control vertices, and then I'm going to show my joints again, and you see as I deform the curve, the joints go with, which gives us a lot of control over how we want to shape this tail. And the IK handle always is stuck at the end of the curve. How do we now easily animate this Spline IK? We need some kind of controllers, and it's very impractical to have to go to your curve, select your control vertices, move them and animate them separately. You want easy control over that. So if I hide my joints again for a second and go into my curve and say Control Vertex, I can select a control vertex, not with soft selection. Can select a control vertex. We want to constrain it somehow, control it. Oddly enough, this is found under Deform, and we can create a cluster for this point. You get the little C there, and if we select that cluster, we can move it, and that moves the control vertex. Yay! So we basically need to do that for every point on the curve. So select a point, deform, cluster. Go to the curve, select the control vertex, go to the control vertex, select the control vertex, and deform, cluster. Go to the curve, select the control vertex, and deform cluster. Select the last point on the thing. That's a bit tricky because it might accidentally select the... Yeah, I selected the IK. Let's turn off the IK handle visibility. And go into Control Vertex, select the last CV on the curve, and again, Control Cluster. Now we've got clusters for every single point. How are we now going to make sure that we have good controllers on them? Well, this first cluster determines where the whole bone chain starts and where it sticks. So that one should basically, if we turn the joints back on, be stuck to the main joint, the joint where this one joint it is on is attached to. So the first cluster is going to be parent constrained to the connection joint. So this joint is going to parent constraint the first cluster. So constrain parent, go into the options, we do maintain the offset, and add. So now at least the first point will stick with the skeleton. The other ones need to have controllers on them. I always like to use little circles to do that. So if we go into our front view, I'm just going to, at the origin, build a little circle, a NURBS circle, hold down X to make it exactly at the center, and there we have our NURBS circle, which we can then move up to the cluster. And it should be exactly on the cluster. A cluster is basically a point, so we're going to snap it to the point. Boom. And there it is. It's always nicer to have a controller that isn't completely flat. So we're going to go in and to the curve points, to the control points on the control vertices on the controller. Make it bent a little, and we probably want to also make it a little bit smaller because it seems a bit big. Got all the points. I'm doing this with the control vertices and not with the whole object selected because this doesn't create any history, and if I now go into my object mode, the thing has no history. I can, it does have a translation and a rotation. We want to freeze that soon. But first we're going to make them for every little controller. So this is my tail control up. And we're going to duplicate that, move it, snap it to the next cluster, boink, and rotate it a little. We actually want to have it up there. Makes more sense. Duplicate it, move it to the next one, snap it to the point, rotate a little again, and one last one for the end. Duplicate it, move it out there, and there we go. We got a controller for everything. Now, name them. So this is going to be mid up. You can name whatever you want them, but that sort of makes sense. This is going to be mid down, and this is going to be the tip. We got all our controllers in a row. Now we need to make sure that those controllers, of course, control the appropriate clusters, and that's really easy because we can just parent them to it. We also want to make sure that they move with the whole skeleton. And the easiest way to connect all those controllers to your rig is it can just be stuck on this root controller. So what we can do, there's several ways of doing that, but at least we can at least make them into a nice little tail group. As a tail control group, of course. And then stick the whole tail control group to that joint. So we're going to select the joints and the tail control group, not the tail control themselves. And we're going to constrain those to it. So now if he moves, the controllers move with. Now we just need to make sure that the first cluster, the second cluster, goes with the first controller. So this should go with the tail control up. So we just drag it right underneath. The third one goes under the second controller, the fourth one goes under the third controller, and the fifth one goes under the last controller. So now these clusters are parented to the respective controllers, and if we move the controllers, we can move the tail and we can now shape it any way we want because it's controlled by a curve and not a regular single plane IK. We do, of course, want to make sure that all these controllers have no deformations, and I should have done that earlier, but if we're lucky, we can still freeze those transformations, and yes, we can. So in their base state, they're all frozen, and they all control their individual point on the curve. And that's basically it. You can connect these controllers different ways to each other, so the one controls the next, but that's fine-tuning it. This is the basic idea on how to add a tail with joints and controllers to an existing rig, in this case the DNS auto rig.